Hi, welcome back to our computer tutorial, and today we're going to discuss the topic on DHCP, or if we spell it out, it actually stands for Dynamic Host Configuration Protocol. So DHCP, okay, or Dynamic Host Control Protocol. Now we're going in for today's session. We're going to do two configurations. First one is using configuring DHCP with a server, okay, with a DHCP server, and the other one is configuring DHCP with a router. Okay, so these are the things that we'll be considering today in setting up. So a brief overview of what DHCP does is it actually assigns IP addresses to devices or computers that are attached to the network. So if you are an IP administrator, it's okay if there's just 5 to 10 computers, and then you manually configure the IP addresses. But what about if it goes more than 10, or even the 10 IP addresses that you need to configure manually is a little bit tedious already. So if the wisest thing to do is you actually set up a DHCP server, so that automatically these computers will fetch or get the IP addresses they need for their own, for them to be able to be connected to the network, is the DHCP, okay, which is what we're going to do today. Okay, so the first one is we're going to configure one switch, and then let's have two computers, one and one server. So this is the server, this is the switch, and then let's have another computer. Okay, so basically we will not assign IP addresses on these two computers because the server is going to provide that IP address for the two computers. Okay, so this is an example. So on your part, you can actually try out more than two computers, but for this I think is enough for demonstration purposes only. Okay, we're going to connect now PC3 and laptop 1 to switch 2 by using a straight through connector or straight through cable. Let's say, for example, we connect this computer to fast Ethernet 1, and then the other one is we connect to fast Ethernet 2, and then the server is we connect to fast Ethernet 3. Okay, so basically let's try to check if what happens if we try to get the IP address with and use the DHCP without configuring the server. Okay, so let's just wait for all the green lights to turn on, then let's try and check. Okay, last connection is from the server. If this turns green, there it turned green, and then let's try and let's check. So how do you configure your terminals or your computers or laptops for DHCP? Is you click on it, and then desktop, and then IP configuration. So it's static, and then you click on DHCP. Let's check if what IP addresses it generates there. Okay, so when your DHCP fails, this is what you always get, the 169 IP address. Okay, so that means our DHCP was not configured correctly, that's why it's not working. Same goes for this laptop. Let's try to check desktop, IP configuration, and then click on DHCP. still failed. Okay, so let's turn it back to static so that later we can do this, try to put it back in DHCP after configuring the server. Now it's time to configure the server, so we click on the server and then we click on services. Okay, so next is we click on, we have here DHCP. Basically you need to also configure your server's IP address manually. Okay, this is the one that you need to configure manually. Okay, so this is 192.168.1.1. This is our server, so let's have it 1.1. Then subnet mask will be populated, and then let's just check. I'll just try that. This is also our gateway 192.168.1.1, and then let's just assume that there's also another server, the DNS server, which is attached to the network, which is 1.2. Just assumption, okay? This in our example doesn't really exist, but this is just we'll just assume. Okay, so let's go out of this and go back to config. Services. So we have now our IP address. Let's go back. We now have the IP address. Sorry, I closed it. It should have been services and then DHCP. And then here we are able to see the default configuration of DHCP. It's off. Okay, it's off. It's not turned on. So now we're going to configure. So let's just have this default pool name, which is server pool, and then let's have the gateway, which is the same as what we typed in the IP configuration, which is 192.168.1.1, and then the DNS server, which is 192.168.1.2. Okay, so start IP address, you have the option of not starting with 0. Let's say, for example, you wanted to have some reserved range of IP address for you to assign it manually to computers that you know. You can have that. So let's say, for example, 1 to 5 or 1 to 5 IP address will be reserved for static. So you start with maybe 6, no? So, or let's have it 6. Start IP address with 6, and then so of course it's 255. This kind of IP address has a subnet mask of this 255, 255, 255, and 0. So maximum number of users is 512. You may or may not change this. Okay, after doing those configurations, it's time to save it. Okay, so now here below it's been updated. We have our default gateway 1.1, DNS server at 1.2, and the start IP address is 1.6. Okay, the last thing you need to do now is turn the server on, the DHCP server on. Let's click on it. Let's click on it. Let's click on the service on. Okay, so we've turned it on. Let's just wait for a while. Check it. DHCP is turned on already. Now it's time to check if it actually worked. So we click on these two terminals or these two devices. So we go back to IP configuration. It's on static. DHCP. This should work. Hopefully this works. Yes, it worked already. And as you notice, it started with 6. Okay, it started with 6. And you have here the subnet mask and then the default gateway, which was supplied in the DHCP server. Okay, so DHCP request was successful. Okay, the other one also, let's try configuration with DHCP again. There. Okay, so DHCP request is successful, and that is now a success. Even if we try the packet simulation, of course it's going to be successful. Okay, here, going here, it's going to be successful. Let's delete this. So now we have these two And now let's try to configure another connection, which is the configuring DHCP server with a router. Okay, so now let's also have the same. There's two computers and then a laptop, and then we have a switch of which these two computers are connected to, and then we have a router. Now let's try the other routers here, like for example the 2911, which is a gigabit router. Okay, so if you say if as you can see, if I hover on the router, you have here the ports gigabit Ethernet 00, gigabit Ethernet 01. So it's not an Ethernet router, but it's a gigabit router. So what's the difference, if you would ask? So the difference basically is its speed, its capacity to hold, its capacity to have higher speed. So basically in Ethernet, our speed starts with 10 megabits per second, and the next is 100 megabits per second, and our what we call the megabit, or the gigabit router, or the router that supports the ports of this router actually supports up to 1000 megabit per second, or 1 gigabit, okay, per second. Okay, so that's how gigabit router, which we are using on this simulation, works. So let's now connect this the same as how we connected the DHCP server, but the difference is just we have this router as the one who's going to provide us with the DHCP service. Okay, so we're going to connect this straight through past Ethernet to 1, and then 2, and then this 3, going now to, okay, there are 3. We're just going to choose on the gigabit Ethernets. Okay, 0, 1, 0, 0, 0, 1, or 0, 2. So let's have the 0, 0. Okay, there. So now we are physically connected, but obviously it's not yet configured for DHCP as what we had earlier with the first situation we had. So of course this is going to, if we click on desktop IP configuration, this will really fail and give us the 169 IP address. Okay, as you can see, it's a 169 IP address. The other one also, of course, it's still red, but of course it's going to be, even if it turns green somehow, it will still not work, because of course it's not yet turned on. The gigabit port is not turned on, that's why it's red. Okay, so let's configure first the router. So let's put back the configuration of the IP address to static. So now it's time to configure the router. So in router, okay, there's not much we can do with how to configure it as what we had with using the server. Now in configuring a router, we really use the CLI, or the command line interface. Okay, so CLI, click on CLI. After clicking on the router, click on CLI and then press enter. Okay, router. So commands for the router for us to be able to configure is of course to enable it. We type first enable, or en, and then the next one is we configure it. We enter the config key, or configure terminal mode. So ft, or configure terminal. Okay, this actually is the same. So now we're going to access the port of this one. is gigabyte 0/0. Okay, so this is what we're going to access. So how do we do that? If you can still remember, it's actually the command is interface or int or interface. Interface, what's that? G0/0 or gigabyte port 0. Okay, then press enter, and then we're going to assign an IP address on that port or that gigabyte 00. So the IP address, let's give it a 192.168.1.1, 192.168.1.1, and we also have to supply the subnet mask, which is of course 255.255.0. So IP address 192.168.1.1, 255.255.255.0. Okay, the next command is to turn on the port. Okay, like what we did with the here with the server here, what we did is we click on this on. So in equivalent, as an equivalent command here in the CLI for the router is it's actually no shut. Okay, no shut. So parang ino-on natin yung port na yun, the interface gigabyte 00. So no shut. What it actually does, it turns on the port. It's going to keep the interface up even if you reboot or unplug the cable. Okay, so that means even if when you after issuing this command, even if we unplug the cable, it will still be on. Okay, so it will be standalone that it's turned on. Okay, so that's no shut. Now if we want to turn off that interface, that's G00, anytime we issue the command, example, we press this shut. Okay, if we want to turn it off, we issue the command shut down. Okay, that's the opposite of no shut, which of course we're not going to do now because we're going to turn this on. So no shut. Okay, and then press okay. So as you can see, interface gigabyte 00 change state to up. Okay, so change state to up. So now it's online. Okay, it's like it's turned on already. So now we have to configure the DHCP. Now just the same with the here on the DHCP, we tried to reserve some IP addresses in the future for static addressing. So 1 to 5 is not included here. That means the IP addresses will be assigned start. For a start IP is 6. Okay, so let's try to do it also here in our router. So how do we do that? So for us to be able to reserve, okay, is we use the keyword exclude. So how do we do that? First is we type the IP DHCP command and then excluded space dash address, and then we type the address, spelling, and then we type the IP address range 192.168.1.1 up to where it should be. So up to 5 because that is what we want. That DHCP will not assign the IP addresses 1 up to 5 because we will start with 6 for the DHCP. So 192.168.1.6. Oh, sorry, it's 5, so that it starts with 6. Okay, so IP DHCP excluded address 192.168.1.1 up to 1.5, and then press enter. Okay, next now is we assign a name for the DHCP pool like what we had. which is server pool in for this one, DHCP. So it's a server pool, the pool name, this one, the pool name. Okay, so for the router is the command is IP DHCP pool and then the name. Okay, let's say for example pool my addresses, my first DHCP. Okay, my first DHCP, the IP DHCP, and then pool and then the name, then enter. So that's the name already. Now we're going to declare also the network address, the default router, and the DNS server, so that when we click on those computers later, we will see that it has route, it has the gateway, and it has the server. So first is we type the command network for the network address 192.168, which is 1.1, no? And then the subnet mask 255.255.255.0. So network, and then the IP address 192.168.1. Then press enter. And the next is the default router, or the default gateway. Okay, but the command that we issue is default router 192.168. That 1.1. Okay, and then the DNS dash server 192.168.1.2. Okay, so there it is. It has now been configured and it has been turned on. So let's try to get out of this, and then let's check if it actually worked. Okay, so let's try it here, and then click on IP configuration. It's static. Hopefully this works. Of course it works. Okay, so as you can see, it started with 6. Okay, 192.168.1.6, and then we have here the default gateway 168.1.1, DNS server 1.2 as we have assigned in the router, and same for laptop number 2, IP configuration. So it's static. You click on DHCP, there, it's a success. Okay, so that's how easy it is to configure DHCP using a server and using a router. Thank you so much for listening. Have a great day. Thank you. Bye.